Welcome to another edition of Madden Benz Unfiltered. Tim Benz, along with you, Kevin Gorman with us as well today because Mark is out. Mark is in Vegas, a little under the weather too out in Vegas. So Kevin's been kind enough to pinch hit today. He, of course, covers the Pirates for us at TribLive. And that was a big weekend over at PNC Park with the Paul Skenes debut on Saturday. So Kevin's going to join us to talk about that and a lot of other things going on. If you missed the news right before we came on, Bronny James staying in the NBA draft. So the dream of LeBron's kid to Duquesne is not happening. We can kick that around. We'll get into a lot of other topics as well. We're brought to you by Rush to Crush Cancer. It's more than a ride. It's a mission, and it's coming up this weekend. You can still sign up for it. Hurry up to get into the race. Sunday, the 19th, is the race for the Rush to Crush Cancer bike ride. Whether you're a cycling enthusiast, just love the mission, or you're part of a group, we've got a course for you. Everybody's been affected by cancer, so register today to go to rushtocrushcancer.org. That's rushtocrushcancer.org, and help us in the fight against cancer. All proceeds stay right here in the Pittsburgh area, so join the ride. Kevin, what were your impressions of what you saw from Paul Skenes in his debut start and how the entire day went for the Pirates over at PNC Park on Saturday?
Well, it was like having 2 days in one, just in terms of, the weather being an issue. But the excitement there was palpable. It was pretty wild to see the fan base energized over a Pirates team and over a debut like none I've experienced at the ballpark. And I was at Garrett Cole's debut. I think I was at Andrew McCutcheon's debut. The excitement there was kind of unbelievable, just to everybody to know that the number one draft pick was here only 10 months after being selected. Paul Skenes kind of showed us a little bit of why everybody wanted to see him in the majors so fast, and also why the Pirates were trying to bring him along so slowly. We saw a guy who, threw 33 fastballs and averaged 100.1 miles an hour on that. That's pretty incredible. That I think 5 of his first 6 pitches topped 100 miles. He hit 101.9 on his 12th pitch, that pitch to Cody Bellinger. But we also saw a guy go deep into counts. We saw him give up a home run. We saw him give up a couple walks, and I think it was a half dozen hits. And so, we saw a guy who's not quite the polished product at the major league level as you would hope, but also that it was a good start for Paul Skenes. Not a great start, but a good start, and one that showed you some promise that there's a lot more to come.
I agree with a lot of that. Like, for instance, the stuff early on was obvious. The crowd building with every momentum of each pitch over the first 2 batters. Like, that was a lot of fun. It became the direct opposite a few hours later, where the crowd was booing more and more with every ball from the relief pitchers coming out of the bullpen, which we'll get to. And yet people can still comment, by the way. If you want to send in comments, do so. If you're at the game, if you want to talk about Skenes' debut or how the day went for the Pirates in general, Kevin's here to talk about it. I thought that while the stuff played early, it wasn't so overwhelming, Kevin, that he didn't allow, 9 base runners over 4+ innings, right? Like you said, 6 hits. I think he walked 2 and hit a guy. So I think there's 9 base runners overall from the Cubs. There is obviously still a step he's got to get to where the dominance that we saw in college, the dominance that we saw in the minors, plays throughout a 6 or 7 inning game, to be sure, in the major leagues. The other thing that was curious about the way that whole scenario went for them was his top out was 75 pitches in the minors, right? So he had 74. Like you said, he was going deep in counts. There was a couple batters that fouled off a few pitches that kept at bats going, got ahead here and there and then couldn't put guys away, or got behind and then had to catch up in counts. So it got the pitch count up, to be sure. But I was a little surprised to see him come out in the 5th because they are so conscious of pitch count, inning count. The only thing to be gained by getting him out there in the 5th was to get him a win, which is a stat that by their standards and a lot of other people's standards doesn't even matter anymore. So I was surprised they brought him out in the first place, and then to pull him after 2 guys got on, I think that just started the pinwheel going in the wrong direction for them.
No question. And, I think, they wouldn't say as much, but it appears, given that he threw 84 pitches, which was a career high as a professional, that he was probably on an 85 pitch count. And the Pirates, I thought it was a good sign that they allowed him to get to that pitch count rather than saying, well, you're at 74, and unless you throw an incredibly efficient 5th inning, we're not going to send you back out there. I think they would have gotten booed tremendously had Paul Skenes not gone back out for the fifth, given that they had the lead and that he was pitching well enough. He certainly wasn't dominant in the way that maybe some people expected. He was everything that I expected. I thought you saw a guy who used a pitch mix, 3 pitches pretty liberally in terms of the fastball, the slider, and the splinter. He also mixed in a curveball and a changeup, just to kind of throw off the pace. But here's what I was impressed with, Tim. This is a guy who threw a fastball that averaged 100 miles an hour. He throws the splinter, which is around 95 miles an hour. He's got the slider, which comes in around 89, 90 miles an hour. And then he has a changeup that's somewhere between 86 and 88, and the curveball around 82. That's a pitch mix that can keep batters guessing. That's a pitch mix that can keep batters timing off balance. And that's going to work for him as he gets accustomed to pitching in the major leagues against better hitters who are either going to hit him or foul off a lot of pitches. I think it's going to force him to pitch a little bit differently in terms of his sequencing and in terms of his attack. I think that's kind of shows you the difference between Paul Skenes at age 21 and Jared Jones at age 22. I mean, these guys are only months apart, but Jared Jones has all that time in the minor leagues because he was drafted out of high school. Is that Jared Jones is living in the strike zone and attacking hitters and doing it with kind of ruthless efficiency. And Paul Skenes wasn't that way. Paul Skenes was a guy who was getting fouled off and was going deep into counts, threw a lot of balls, didn't have as good. That's the thing. It's, kind of amazing.
He lived on the block too. There were a lot of 50-50 calls. Some he got, some he didn't get, but he was on the block a lot, as opposed to, like you said, Jones challenging guys in the middle of the strike zone sometimes and hoping the stuff just plays.
And that might be a matter of, does my stuff play here? Let's see how it goes, given that he did get hit around a little bit. Not, nothing to be concerned about. But certainly he didn't have his fastball command. And when you think about that, you think that he looked good. And he wasn't happy with his performance. He said, I've got to be better. I've got to do a better job. But given that he didn't have his fastball command, which is his bread and butter pitch and his put away pitch, that tells you that this is a guy who has more to offer than just throwing heat.
Well, let's get to the second part of it, and people can comment on this too. It's more than just Skenes that happened on Saturday because, like you said, it was 2 days in one, right? Like, you had the Skenes debut that everybody was excited about for the first few hours, and then he gets pulled, and we see something none of us have ever seen before. And I don't know if this was the first time it ever happened in Major League Baseball history. I didn't go back to the Elias stats on this, but to see 6 guys walked in 1 inning and what was it? How many pitches in a row were balls? What was the final tally?
Oh, I think it was it was a hit by pitch followed by 15 consecutive balls.
That's unbelievable.
12 by Cal Nicholas and 3 by Josh Fleming before he got the Bronx cheer. It was like watching Bugs Bunny. In some ways, it's like Paul Skenes throwing the Bugs Bunny, pitches that he's going to get Bugs Bunny strikeouts too. This is a guy who gets, people corkscrew into the ground. He did it with Jackson Holliday, the number 1 prospect in the game in the spring breakout in mid-March against the Baltimore Orioles. He had him corkscrewed into the ground. But the Bugs Bunny part of it is the conga line, with these guys, just one walk after another. It was kind of ridiculous.
I mean, the whole night wasn't supposed to turn into a sideshow statistical fiasco about walks and the manager having his name chanted to be fired like he's Matt Canada. Although I will say this, Matt Canada would have been embarrassed by that effort from Pirates fans. You got to put a little bit more into it than that. That was nothing. That was tamed. If you're going to do it, go do it. But, and then the rain delay, the 2.5-hour rain delay that ensued after that. It was like, this triumph, this moment where, like, it was raining all day and there was horrible cloud cover in the sky. Like, oh no, are we going to get this game? And people are lined up outside of PNC Park in rain slickers and garbage bags to get in. And then the skies part and it's this glorious sun-splashed afternoon for Skenes. And then the minute he gets taken out, everything went to crap. Like, everything went to crap.
It was like God himself was unhappy with the decision to pull Paul Skenes. It wasn't just the Pirates fan base.
Right.
That's the thing. And then you have the double rainbow on top of that. And it was kind of like, the sun shines on the Pirates once again. You're hoping that Paul Skenes is the pot of gold. I think what it's really more likely, for one, you have to remind yourself that this is a guy who made his major league debut in 10 months. And only made 12 starts in the minors, which is really, really exceptional in terms of the expediency which he got from LSU to the Pirates. He was last June. We're not even in June yet. Last June, at the end of June, he was pitching in the College World Series, and now this guy's making his major league debut. Tim, I think you go back 65 years since a team has done something like that with the walks. And it was brutal. And it was obvious, Kyle Nicholas came in and struck out the first two batters he faced. And then, this is a guy who averaged a walk an inning in the minors. And that's why he got moved to the bullpen, because he had trouble staying in the strike zone. And it was just brutal to watch. And I know it was brutal for him to endure. He had a rough debut against the Cubs, and he had a rough game against the Cubs on Saturday. And Nicholas has been very good in between. But those two games in particular were just absolutely brutal to watch.
What I want to talk about, too, as it relates to the six-man rotation, because apparently that was part of the factoring in of why they left Nicholas in for all of this in the first place, right, was because they're going to a six-man rotation. What Shelton said is they're going to be thin in the bullpen because they're going to be down a guy, so they need to cover that. That was his quote afterwards. We need to cover that. I don't understand the need to go to the six-man rotation, especially after part of the reason allegedly why they were waiting the extra start to get Skenes up in the first place was they want to get him on a five-man rotation schedule. So, I just don't see the need to super serve Bailey Falter or Quinn Priester or somebody, to do that.
Yeah. That is contradictory, especially when their rationale for pulling Jared Jones against the Mets on April 16th was that was his first time pitching on 4 days rest. It's his only time he's pitched on 4 days rest in 7 or 8 starts. Paul Skenes, that was his first start on 4 days rest in the minors, was his final start for AAA Indianapolis. And so for them to all of a sudden go, well, we're going to go to a 6-man rotation and we're going to give everybody 5 or 6 days rest, depending on whether there's an off day built in, is a completely change of pace for the way the Pirates are going. I can tell you, I talked to Martin Perez about it yesterday. He was not happy about it. This is a guy who is in his 13th major league season. He's 33 years old. He's used to the routine of pitching on every 4. But you have 3 rookie right-handers in Skenes, Jones, and Quinn Priester, and none of these guys have pitched more than 150 innings in a season. I can understand what the Pirates are doing when you look at the schedule with the built-in days off in May and June, and especially July when there's the All-Star break. Because August, I think there's only 3 or 4 days off the whole month. In September, it's only like 2 or 3. So when they get to the end of the season, which the Pirates are hoping, and based on this record they have right now of 18-23 going into the Milwaukee series, it appears to be wishful thinking, is that the Pirates could be in contention. And they're feeling like if they're in contention, they want to have Skenes and Jones available in August and September and potentially even October. And so that's why they're trying to do this, is to reduce the wear and tear by having 1 or 2 fewer starts over the course of the season with all those built-in days, is that these guys aren't going to go above their what their pitch counts are and what their innings counts are. But at the same time, Tim, you wrote a column on this. The future is here. The future is now. And it seems like it's a plan where you're really talking more about kicking the can down the road.
Well, to be honest with you, that whole angle, and I did want to get into that for a last thought on the Pirates before we get to some other stuff. And people can still comment on the big picture with the Pirates too, if you want to look at it. They are more or less out of guys that they can pump the well on for, hey, help is coming. The future is it's basically Tamar Johnson at this point, and I suppose a hope for a revamped Henry Davis. I guess they can use that as well to leverage that he's going to learn in the minors and come back and be a better player, which is not beyond the realm of possibility, of course. But, with Skenes coming up, in my opinion, that's the last piece of, hey, it's going to get better soon. He's the soon. Soon is now here.
He's the major piece to the puzzle, and he's the guy that everybody was excited. And I think that's why the fans wanted to see him so much, was they felt like this is a team that has a lineup that, that is the first time in years is a lineup that can compete, if not contend. And certainly there are more guys in the minors. There's a lot of pitchers that are probably a year away, but there's a couple pitchers that might be able to come up and help. But right now, when you're looking at their top prospects, aside from Tamar Johnson, you have Skenes up, you've had Davis up. Nick Gonzalez is here. Quinn Priester is here. Leiver Peguero is another guy that was a top 10 prospect that could come up. But we've seen these guys, and what you realize is that you're not going to win with rookies. The rookies are going to have an adjustment period. And so, the Pirates are probably going to be in the point coming very soon where they're going to have to trade some prospects and bring in a veteran bat to help this lineup, because that seems to be the biggest problem right now. The bullpen hasn't quite lived up to its billing. That was supposed to be the strength of this team. But right now it's the having a lineup, with 4 guys below the Mendoza line and having a team that has the inability to score with runners, to drive in people with runners in scoring position.
Yeah, and to your point about the bullpen, it was another shaky effort from Bednar, but he got out of it yesterday, and then Chapman took the loss in extra innings against the Cubs. So, Pirates fans, if you want to comment, we'll take some comments on the Pirates, any and all things relating to the skiing start to the weekend that was at PNC Park. If you were there, if you sat through the rain delay, you heard the Fire Shelton chants, everything else Pirates related, go ahead. But we did want to mention, as we pointed out at the start of the webcast today, the basketball story of interest, the dream of LeBron James's kid to Pittsburgh and Duquesne has died. That's not happening. LeBron James's kid, Bronny, is going to stay in the NBA draft. This is what I predicted would happen the whole time, Kevin. I know a lot of people thought that because of the Drew Joyce connection and Drew Joyce III getting the job once Keith Dambrot retired, that LeBron's son was going to come to Duquesne. I'm probably the one person in Pittsburgh that's not upset about this, because that means that they're not going to be on national TV every night, and I can still keep calling games. So from a selfish standpoint, I'm fine with this outcome. Now, I know a lot of Duquesne fans, joking aside, they wanted to see this. It would have been exciting. It would have been fun for the program. It would have been a ton of attention on the program. But I never thought it was going to happen, Kev. I know you felt differently, that you thought this would be good for Bronny. But honestly, if the goal is for him to play with his dad, and his dad's dream is to have Bronny play with him on the court at the same time, why delay it? Like the Lakers have one of the last picks in the draft. They can draft him, or he can intentionally go undrafted and the Lakers can just sign him. Like if he sticks around and actually gets better for a year or two, then, who knows? Maybe he's a Spur. Maybe he's a Milwaukee Buck. Like somebody actually does draft him. They have a lot of control in this situation, because he's either not going to get drafted. The Lakers are going to draft him in the second round, and then all is right with the plan, So like, I'm not surprised this is the outcome.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that this is the outcome either. And that's the thing. I didn't think Bronny would be going to Duquesne. I just thought it would be good for him. This is a guy who wasn't.
In theory, if he's a regular player, then I would definitely agree with you. But this is not a regular circumstance. He pretty much has a ticket to go play for the Los Angeles Lakers, or at least their G League team.
Well, it's more likely their G League team. That's right. Where I was going to. This is a guy who was not a high school superstar. He was highly ranked, but more so based on his name and his potential, because there is potential there. But he's not 6'8" like his dad. He's closer to 6'3". He played on a star-studded high school basketball team in which he was not the top option, the top scoring option. He averaged like 13, 15 points a game. And so I thought that going to play for Drew Joyce III, playing at Duquesne, a mid-major program that is coming off an NCAA tournament appearance and an NCAA tournament win, where he could have been the focal point of that team and had a chance to be a star player for the first time in his career and play at a level for a coach who knows him and understands him and understands what comes along with that package. I mean, Drew Joyce was LeBron's high school teammate at St. Vincent St. Mary and understands the hype that comes with it. And probably better equipped to deal with that than any coach in America. So I thought that would have been a good move for Bronny. I don't see the rush to get him to the NBA because he's not NBA ready. If you recall, when Bronny was going into his freshman year at USC, he went into cardiac arrest on the court, nearly died. I mean,
I think that was as much anything as the weight, Kevin, now that I'm looking at some of the things I saw on Twitter today, and it happened right before we came on, so I didn't get to read all of it entirely. But a lot of the headlines that I saw, I think especially from Wojnarowski at ESPN, like part of the lead was, he was medically cleared by the NBA doctors. So like, I guess this was a major factor in why the decision was as long as it was. Like, I think they were waiting on the medicals more than they were like, hey, how's the transfer portal going to shake out? It seems like the medicals are actually the bigger deal.
Yeah, I mean, he's in a position, whether you're talking about high school, whether you're talking about college in the portal or the NBA in the draft, he really is in a position to pick and choose where he goes because of his name and his brand. Any college in the country would have welcomed him because they're welcoming essentially LeBron James into their program as well as their biggest fan, and there could perhaps come sponsorship that could come with that. Certainly Duquesne has benefited from that alliance with Keith Dambrot and LeBron. The other part of it is I don't think Bronny's going to get drafted. I don't think any team out there is going to say this is a guy we have to use a draft pick on unless they want to play spoiler or unless they want to attract LeBron as a free agent. That could be a motive, is saying, hey, we'll draft Bronny if you'll come and sign with us. Certainly, When I think about, fathers playing with sons, the first one that comes to mind is Ken Griffey and his son Junior. And the thing is, it's flipped here that Ken Griffey was a great baseball player, but Ken Griffey Jr. was a generational talent who's a Hall of Famer. This is flipped in that way, that LeBron James is a generational talent, if not a once in a lifetime talent, who is going to be an easy Hall of Famer and is in the conversation for greatest ever, whereas Bronny is not. And so, LeBron wanting to play with his son is understandable, but I think, it would be better served for him if he played with his son when his son actually had a chance to be, an NBA player. In this one, it kind of comes more like Giannis and his younger brother, who's going to just be along on the team and along for the ride.
Last thing, Kev, before we go to the comments here, I know you're keeping tabs on the Steelers. Are you at all concerned about the wide receiver situation? Mark talked about it during the Madden Monday podcast today. In his words, if Omar Khan doesn't get a legit number 2 starting capable wide receiver, then Khan has failed the offseason despite all of the praise that he's gotten for his other moves. What do you think?
I don't think Mark's off the mark on that one. I think it's definitely an imperative that the Steelers have to acquire another wide receiver. I actually think that they're going about it the right way if they land one by doing so through trade. You can draft a wide receiver, but there is still a learning curve there. And even if you have an impact guy, which the Steelers have had with somebody like a Juju Smith-Schuster and to maybe a lesser extent George Pickens, Pickens is still a young receiver. I'd like to see them get a veteran receiver, especially one who can play inside and outside, who's going to be a physical receiver. I think that's something that this team needs, is someone who's going to be kind of the guy who's going to go up and make those battle catches. That's definitely what's missing for this team. And certainly I still think the quarterback situation is a bit in flux because they don't have a long-term situation there. They have 2 guys that are essentially on 1-year deals. But I think, if you're going to go that route, you need to surround them with the talent. I like what they've done with the offensive line, with the draft picks there. And I think they have the foundation for the future there. But certainly you've got a guy in Najee Harris who could be a trade piece, but he also could be a back who's upset about his contract situation. But I think the Steelers have cleared some cap space, and I think they need to go out and acquire a wide receiver. It should be their number 1 priority going into the season.
All right, let's get to some comments here, Kevin. We'll start things off with Richard. He says, Skenes has elite potential, but the Pirates as an organization are likely to waste his 3 to 4 max years here before he's traded off for prospects, and it's full rebuild time again. Of course, with the way things have gone for the past 30 years or so, it does feel like there's a ticking clock as soon as a star comes up with the Pirates. I get that. But they got some playoff years out of Garrett Cole, too. And that's what I'm hoping kind of happens with Skenes in this era of the Pirates. I'm just very dubious of that ever happening.
Well, and every Pirates fan has the right to be dubious. They've earned that right over the past 30 years with the way the organization has conducted itself. I look at this as part of a process and a plan that the Pirates were very deliberate about and very intentional about the way they talked about, is they wanted to draft and they wanted to develop talent. They said they would acquire talent when the team was ready to contend. So I think that's why it's important to have Skenes and Jones here right now, so that this is a team that could be in contention at the trade deadline instead of being an obvious seller, which they've been too many times in the past. I take a little bit of a different view on this. There's a window that's open, and you mentioned this in your column, Tim, that the window's open. You have to make sure it doesn't slam shut on your fingers. When you look at this Pirates team, they have Mitch Keller, Brian Reynolds, and Brian Hayes locked up as 3 foundational pieces. You would imagine the 4th foundational piece would be O'Neal Cruz, who's starting to look like himself again, and that's a good thing for the Pirates, at least at the plate. And then you have this young pitching staff with guys like Jones and Skenes who offer so much potential. And right now it's very tantalizing what they're able to do. It's a matter of whether it's sustainable over the course of the full season for those 2, given that their youth and their inexperience at the pro level. The thing the Pirates could do, and I think this is what they should do, is become very intentional, like other teams like the Tampa Bay Rays or even like the Oakland A's, who are basically just said, this is how we're going to operate, and have done so with some success, varying degrees. When you're talking Tampa, it's more continuous. I think the Pirates should look at it and say, we're going to have these guys through the years of club control, and we're willing to lose them in free agency or trade them at the deadline in their final year, rather than going, okay, we're going to trade these guys with 2 years of club control because that's when they have their most value. I think the Pirates were intentional about that. You'd say, okay, we have this guy through X amount of years, and then he's eventually going to move on. We all know that. That's what small market baseball is going to be. And at that point, you can draft and develop and plan for their replacements. And you, as we know, you didn't replace a Garrett Cole, but Garrett Cole brought Joe Musgrove, and Joe Musgrove brought David Bednar and Andy Rodriguez. That wasn't a bad return. What you can't have is a Jameson Taillon where you draft them number 2 overall. You bypass a Manny Machado, who is an all-star, a Gold Glove caliber infielder, and a guy who's probably going to be a Hall of Famer, and have Jameson Taillon be very average for the Pirates. Much of it had to do with injuries. You trade him, and then the trade turns out to be as big of a bust as Jameson Taillon was for the Pirates.
What Contreras
they cannot afford to do that again.
Yeah. Contreras sort of the cherry on the sundae there. Richard had it, excuse me, for the Steelers, everyone keeps saying they need a real number 2, but in truth, are we all confident that Pickens is a real number 1? No. I mean, I think that Pickens is a number 1 talent, but he definitely doesn't have number 1 polish yet. That's for sure. Jeremy says not even Paul Skenes can save the Pirates. He saved them from 4 innings. He couldn't save them from the scrutiny that came thereafter. And then Jacob kind of follows that up by saying, should they fire the manager? You heard the chants, Kevin. How much of what's going wrong with the Pirates is on Derek Shelton?
Well, I mean, some of it. I mean, you can question the move just to bring in Kyle Nicholas, who's a guy who has a high walk rate, to bring in him after Paul Skenes. You know, the Pirates could have perhaps gone to Josh Fleming, a veteran, first instead of Kyle Nicholas. You know, I had someone mention to me that Kyle Nicholas is a guy you bring in when you're down 5 runs, not when you're up 5 runs, because there is that potential for the walks. So you can second guess a lot of moves. The thing about the Pirates that I think benefits Derek Shelton is that this is a team that continues to play hard. This is a team that doesn't suffer nearly as many blowout losses, but they still do have extended losing streaks. The hitting funks for a guy, Derek Shelton, who built his reputation as a hitting coach, the hitting funks are hard to fathom. And it's not just 1 or 2 guys. Sometimes it's their best players like Brian Reynolds going through it right now. Sometimes it seems to be the majority of the lineup. And I don't put all of that on the coach, but it also becomes sometimes maybe you need a change of plan. Maybe you need a new voice. I think it's kind of premature for Derek Shelton. People talking about firing Ben Cherington and Derek Shelton, if your whole plan was to...
Yeah, there's one comment in here. Is it time to clean house with the management of the Pirates? That comes from David.
You clean house at a time when their plan is actually coming to fruition, where the guys that they've drafted and developed, Jared Jones and Paul Skenes in particular, and the guys they've acquired by trade. I mean, right now you have to take into consideration that this would be a very different team if Andy Rodriguez didn't get hurt and if Johan Oviedo hadn't gotten hurt. Those are injuries that, were out of the Pirates' control to some extent. Although you could blame them for the way they handled Oviedo late in the season, grinding him through the starts, through a full slate of starts. He made 32 last year. With the Pirates, though, I think it would be kind of unfair to have these guys inherit the mess that they did, bring the Pirates through it, and then to clean house. Because what happens is you bring in a new general manager, a new philosophy, and a new manager and a new philosophy. It's going to include a new coaching staff. Or you retain some of the coaching staff. All of a sudden, the philosophies have changed. All of a sudden, the organizational favorites have changed. And they start to say, okay, well, we know we invested a draft pick in that guy, but he's not my guy. Well, I mean, the Pirates have made too much of an investment in top 10 draft picks to not see them through. And so I think it would be premature to fire Cherington for certain. I think Shelton is kind of a guy who is kind of coaching for his life. And I think he needs to turn it around, because it'd be much easier to change managers than it would be to change everything from top to bottom. This is not the mess right now that it was when Clint Hurdle and Neil Huntington and Frank Coonley all got fired. That was a point where they had reached the point of no return, and everybody was aware that they needed a clean house and they needed a rebuild, because they were in denial about that. And I think that's the biggest thing is this Pirates team has basically said, we're not going to go out and search for quick fixes. We're going to try to do this the right way. In fact, the quick fixes, guys like Yasmani Grandal and Michael A. Taylor, they haven't worked out quite the Rowdy Tellez. They haven't worked out quite the way everybody envisioned. I mean, they've had their moments, but the quick fixes may be guys that are preventing somebody else from coming up right now.
Kevin, thanks for doing this. Appreciate you pinch hitting on short notice. Glad we could get you on the wake of the Skenes debut, and we'll do it again in the future, all right?
Hey, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
All right, Kevin Gorman from TribLive covers the Pirates here for us. That'll do it for Madden Benz Unfiltered this week. Mark will be back next week, then we're off for Memorial Day. Don't forget, Rush to Crush Cancer, more than a bike ride, it's a mission. Join us on the 19th, that's this weekend, for the Rush to Crush Cancer bike ride. To register, go to rushtocrushcancer.org and help us in the fight against cancer. Join the ride.